Welcome to another edition of Hometown History Folk Tales. So Pecos Bill, he is a fictional cowboy and folk hero that is definitely American by nature. He wound out joining the big man idea characters like Paul Bunyan, John Henry, sort of a late edition, if you will. He was based out of short stories in a book by Tex O'Reilly, and it was sort of, the stories were set during the American westward expansion into the southwest of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California. He is, unlike Johnny Appleseed, not based off of any kind of actual real person. He's purely fictional character, and even like, though the author claimed that he was telling these folk tales, it was later sort of talked about that folklorist Richard M. Dorson said that he more invented the stories as folklore, and then later writers sort of either borrowed from a tales from O'Reilly or added further adventures of their own invention to this cycle. His actual name was Edward O'Reilly. The first known stories were in 1917 by Edward O'Reilly for the Century magazine. Eventually they were collected, reprinted in a 1923 book, Saga of Pecos Bill. He had claimed originally that they were part of an oral tradition, but like I had said before, it was discovered he just sort of made everything up, but he made a beautiful story. And like I said, as time went on, the mythos of Pecos Bill grew, and this group of characters that went with him, like Slue-Foot Sue, Shake the Rattlesnake that got used as his lasso, and of course, the story would never be complete without his beautiful and extraordinarily angry and jealous horse named Widowmaker. So the question is, where did Pecos Bill exactly come from? So the story goes in his origins that his family decided to move westward in Texas because the town that they were in had become too big for them, and they wanted the wide open spaces. And somewhere along the way, he wound up falling out of the covered wagon. Family didn't realize that they had lost him, and he eventually was found by a pack of coyotes. Now, this pack of coyotes, they wound out raising him, and that's, I guess he was with them when he would have eventually tamed Widowmaker, or they came to an agreement. Same thing with the wrestling of the rattlesnake Shake and grabbing the smaller snake that he used as his whip. He also, some bear lake monster, he wrestled for days and days and days. And the coyotes sort of taught him everything that he knew, and took care of him and made him into the larger-than-life character that we know. One of the unique things they have, Widowmaker, I guess one of his favorite snacks was dynamite, which is another one of the unique things about them. And the ending is having to do with Widowmaker and Slue-Foot Sue, is when she was quote-unquote lost to him, depending on the version of story that you get, he had become so depressed that he missed her so much that he went back to the coyotes. And they say, according to legend, that when he was finally had gone away, passed on to the nether realm, the coyotes still howl at the moon in remembrance of the mourning that he had for Slue-Foot Sue. So who were some of these iconic characters that sort of go hand in hand with Pecos Bill? So where would Pecos be without his faithful horse, Widowmaker? Now, Widowmaker is said in legend that he was actually a serial killer who eventually had to be brought down by Pecos Bill. And then also the story of Widowmaker leaving the trail of death is sort of followed the path of the Rio Grande River. So that's another version of how the Rio Grande River was created. But Widowmaker they were best pals. This is sort of the folksy, I think, melody time version of Widowmaker, so I'm sure a much more fearsome horse. But he followed Pecos Bill through thick and thin, and even could have rages of jealousy, as we find out as well. So I have to say, a little further on Widowmaker, there is some rumor out there that he started another career. And here it is. You know, it's another one of those weird relationships, horse person with Jesse, but don't tell me that, hey, they all look the same. Not going for that, but who knows? Maybe the movie business spoke to him. You gotta admit, there are some similarities. So another one of the really unique characters that is in the Pecos Bill mythology, if you will, is Shake the Rattlesnake. Apparently this is a massive rattlesnake that he had to battle at some point, wound up befriending, and he used that rattlesnake, I think in most cases, to lasso whatever he was going after. But there's another one of his characters like Widowmaker, Slue-Foot Sue, and Pecos himself that just became larger than life. So the story goes with Slue-Foot Sue that, weirdly enough, apparently she liked to ride a catfish, large catfish apparently, down the Rio Grande River, which, as we talked about, he had a part in creating. So he was so enamored with her that he started to court her, of course. Some of the stories that go off is that one of the ways he got her attention is he shot all the stars out of the sky except for one, which became the Lone Star for Texas. Secret lovers. So this is Slue-Foot Sue. She was actually his lover. I don't think she was ever his wife, but she comes into play just like a number of other characters surrounding Pecos Bill that had become legendary in their own right. And some of the stories that come with her are actually quite interesting of how Pecos Bill met her first and eventually some weird stuff that involved bouncing and whatnot. Where the story takes a turn for the worse. Apparently there was a little bit of a jealousy factor between Pecos Bill's horse Widowmaker and Slue-Foot Sue. So she said the only way that she would marry him when he proposed to her is if she was allowed to ride Widowmaker. Widowmaker was not going to have any part of this. So he bucked and bounced and eventually bounced her off of him, and she landed on her bustle and started bouncing and bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. And in several of the variances, there's different stories with it where he tries to lasso her to bring her back. Some of them he fails, and he eventually, like one of the more morbid versions, is he winds out shooting her to put her out of her misery. And another one, thankfully, he's like, I gotta rescue her or else she bounces into space, she'll starve. So he grabs Shake the Rattlesnake that he uses as his lasso and grabs a hold of her, actually gets her, but he's pulled into space too. And they say that they eventually bounced until they got to the moon, and that's where they stayed for the rest of their lives. And that was the end of his story. One of the other ones is that she bounces up, hits her head on the moon, is so traumatized by this event she never talks to Pecos Bill again. Part of the reason that he wasn't able, in one of the stories he wasn't able to get her is because Widowmaker interfered, because he didn't want her ever on his back again, and he also didn't want her interfering in his relationship with Bill. Okay. It was it was what it was, But anyways, so then they have a version where when he lassos her and brings her back, Widowmaker realizes he wasn't very nice, and he apologized, so he can apparently talk as well.
And to her everlasting respect, she forgave him. But this is one of those relationships. He was married several times, but he never loved anybody like her. And he was one of those characters that he was sort of, the West was his lady, if you will. And he was always pulled away like a sailor is pulled to the sea, to the beauty of the West. So that's the stories about Slue-Foot Sue. Interesting character, but she's another one. They actually have quite a few stories that continue with her as well. She's one of those folk tales, so we'll probably visit her at some point as well. So, in the real world, were there any actual connections to Pecos Bill?
There was actually a Pecos Bill before Pecos Bill. His name was William Rufus Shafter. He was a general from Texas who, during the Civil War, did not fight for the South, but in fact fought for the Union. Now, he had a toughness that was legendary. In fact, they had all kinds of really cool poetry that was done about him, and he was a folklore hero as well, pretty much in Texas, but predated Pecos Bill by about almost 60 years.
So I guess you can say this Pecos Bill was not related to that Pecos Bill. Question is, was he the real Pecos Bill, or was the other Pecos Bill the real Pecos Bill? I guess it's all semantics and it's relative at the end. But they were both real-ish. So surrounding Pecos Bill, there's some of these miraculous tall tales that they give credit to him. In the Melody Time, they actually give him credit for the gold rush. There's that famous line, "There's them thar gold in them thar hills," or something along those lines. But they said supposedly, I guess, some of the men out in that area were trying to steal his cow, so he like punched them in the face and knocked all their gold fillings out and sort of threw them out into the Southern California area, and that's how the gold rush happened. Another one of these tales that's pretty cool is the creation of the Gulf of Mexico.
So the story goes that there was a big drought in Texas, and him being the type of individual that he was very proactive in taking care of things, he lassoed a huge storm system in California and brought it the whole way over to Texas, and it rained and it rained and it rained, and it filled up what would become the Gulf of Mexico.
So another one of the stories is the creation of the Rio Grande River.
So in this story, he and his horse Widowmaker, also known as Lightening sometimes, they were in the middle of the desert and they had run out of water and were thirsty, so he gathered up a large stick and sort of drew out what the Rio Grande would become. He also had another thing that they talk about is that he had a snake, not only Shake, but he had another snake that he used, a smaller snake, as a whip. So there's a lot of these unique stories that have in this area that they do all kinds of different and odd things.
So the last of these tall tales, if you will, that surround the mythos of Pecos Bill is that he was responsible for the creation of the Painted Desert.
So the story goes that he was battling, I guess, some Native Americans, indigenous people, and they were in their war paint, and he was shooting at them and scared them so badly that their war paint flew off of them and hit the surrounding desert and created what we know currently today as the Painted Desert. Tall tale.
So where in popular culture today has Pecos Bill made his mark, other than the written word that happened in early teens and into the 20s of the 20th century?
So Pecos Bill has made several appearances in film, starting with Melody Time, which was done by Disney, I believe back in the 50s. They also had one in the mid-'80s that was an episode of, I think it's Tall Tales and Legends, which was a TV show back then. And then my personal favorite with Patrick Swayze as Pecos Bill, Tall Tale by Disney once again. And believe me when I say this is a phenomenal film. I think the first time I saw it was when I was a teenager at my friend's The Wolf's house, and just absolutely fell in love with it. And they have Paul Bunyan in there, and John Henry as well. So it makes for a great story. And believe me when I say this, there are no ghosts or dirty dancing involved in this film.
So with that, it was another fun folk tales adventure. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I did the filming a little bit differently than I've done in the past. I'm trying some new things, getting comfortable with it, having the edits and shorter sessions, and try to let my personality come out. So I hope you guys enjoyed this film, and coming along again on another one of our filming adventures. And as always, we will see you all about town.